After graduating with honors from Eton College Theater Department in New York, he appeared in the 1971 Broadway revival of On the Town with Bernadine Peters and toured in The Man from the Mountain Show, excuse me, playing the barber to such Don Quixotes as Alan Jones, John Raitt, and Howard Keel. He starred in an award-winning off-Broadway Yiddish musical called The Golden Land, which in recent years he brought to us at Temple Shalom, and we put the show on again here in Dallas, and it was fun. He was seen in Los Angeles area productions of Big River and Funny Girl, the latter with Pia Zadora and Kay Ballard. He appeared in the record-breaking San Diego premiere of I'm Not Rappaport, playing an 81-year-old Nat Moyer, for which he was nominated the Best Actor in a Play by the San Diego Theater Critics Circle. Don presented his one-man show about the life of Danny Kaye, who some of you might have seen. He's done that here in Dallas. It's wonderful. Songs of the Redhead, for an unprecedented 3 years in a row at the University of Judaism in Los Angeles for the Performing Arts program. His television credits include appearances in General Hospital, 9 to 5 with Sally's Brothers, The Movie of the Week, Donor with Melissa Gilbert, and Reasonable Doubts with Marley Matlin. Don has performed in cabaret from New York City's Bushes to Los Angeles, the Gardenia Supper Club. He has also concertized around the country and in Israel as well. Last summer, he sang at the Kennedy Center's July 4th concert, Let Freedom Sing. Don is an invested Cantor. He graduated from the Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion School of Sacred Music in 1978. He spent 10 years as a full-time cantor and music director of Temple Beth Torah in Upper Nyack, New York. He has appeared numerous times as guest soloist with Kol Ehad, the premier Jewish choral in Southern California, the Turtle Creek Chorale in Dallas, and the New Mexico Symphony. He is a member of the Cantors Assembly and a past board member of the American Conference of Cantors. And he is great, and you will enjoy. Don? Yes? You're on.
Good evening. Good evening. First, before I begin, and while Mimi Gooten makes sure that Patricia fits right on.
It's too short.
Is it too short? To be settled.
Sorry, I'm pretty short, but I didn't know.
It's that I stole it from the boxes that just came in yesterday, or thereabouts. Well, it couldn't have come in yesterday, but it came in Friday, and I didn't even get him to sign it. But enjoy it. Well, first, a disclaimer. And when I was asked to, quote-unquote, perform for the society, I said, perform? What do you want me to said, this is a historic society, a Jewish historic society. So, am I entertainment? I said, it seems to me very unseemly to be entertaining for the Jewish society that holds the history of our Jewish community here in Dallas. So I said, well, let me see if I can come up with some kind of, what do they call it, thumbnail history of the music that was sung in Dallas. And I will admit to you that some of my record keeping is a little slipshod, but I became very curious and plan on pursuing my interest in this. I was at Temple Emmanuel on Friday, only to discover that somewhere in the, forgive the term, bowels of that building, there are archives, and within those archives, maybe music, and that I will come back and present to you. So first, a disclaimer, and I know there's at least one member. How many members are here from the Temple Emmanuel Choir? Okay, so please, especially Rosalie in the back, you will correct me with any wrong information that I may have, right? This is not a formal lecture. This was I was supposed to be the entertainment. So you can pop up and say, no, that's wrong, or that's not the way we sang it, or we never sang that at Temple Emmanuel. But let me begin. First page and then the last page. Okay. I'm sure that you know the history of Jewish worship in Dallas, beginning with the establishment of what is now Temple Emmanuel. So plug your ears. Oh, look at that. In 1872, as one Jewish historian made clear to me, by the way, the early Jewish pioneers, anywhere in the United States, could not really be Orthodox Jews. Work was plentiful, but kosher food was not. And so, the founders of Temple already bought into Stephen S. Wise's Minchag Americas, a new and exciting experiment.
Not Stephen Wise, Isaac Wise.
Stephen S. Wise.
Oh, Isaac Wise.
Isaac Wise. Thank you. All right. Look at that. You're listening. Yeah. Good. I want to change this. This would be a new and exciting experiment in Judaism, a practice that would be mosaic in nature, but specific to a more liberal American Judaism. Now, with this Minchag America came the basic tenets of progressive Judaism, which was begun in Germany, an attempt to appear assimilated into the mainstream Christian religious practices of the day, an attempt to seem more Protestant than Jewish. Most of the music, but not all of it, had a very Christian church sound. My first source for early Jewish music is this. What should I do with it already? Union hymnal, a black Union hymnal. By the way, how many people here are from Tiferet and Shereth and more traditional synagogues? Okay. All right, I'm just checking. So, you realize that Reform Jews, remember, wanting to seem more Protestant, and the Reform Judaism of Germany was absolutely based on the Protestant form of prayer, and hymnals were created. This one, I believe the copyright date is 1916. Unfortunately, I got it used. I was very lucky to get it. by the way, and the first couple of pages were torn out. So I need to research when in fact, this book was written. It was published by the Central Conference of American Rabbis, and the vast majority of hymns, and they were absolutely hymns, are in English, but not all of them. Here is a familiar one that I believe is still sung, not a Temple Emmanuel, but you'll tell me in a minute if you're still singing this. But I should let you know, as an aside, I serve on the Commission of Religious Living for the Union of American Hebrew Congregations. There were two, count them, two rabbis as we were discussing some of our practices. And one of the rabbis mentioned that this is Baltimore Hebrew in Baltimore. And the rabbi said that at the high holidays, they still do their Kedusha, that's Kadosh, Kadosh, that one, they still do it in German. I don't know. Okay? So it's very possible that God is in his holy temple is still sung somewhere around the country. And here's what it sounds like. Back in 1916, this is the arrangement from this book. It is, we now turn our hymnals to number 35. God is in his holy temple. And it's very possible when Temple Emmanuel was founded in 1872 that this is exactly what the piano. This is not to make fun. This is not to make fun of Temple Emmanuel. This is for you to get the idea that to have even a piano in Dallas at that time was quite a feat. And because of the heat...
John, Temple Emmanuel was opened in 1876. It had an organ.
Had an organ.
And they played that piece according to the Dallas Herald.
Okay. And they played the piece at the opening?
And they had, yes, and they had a choir.
Incredible. What? Well, okay.
Were you there?
Okay. Here is God is in his holy temple. God is in his holy temple. Earthly thoughts be silent now, while with reverence we assemble, and before his presence bow. He is with us now and ever, when we call upon his name, aiding every good endeavor, guiding every upward aim. No, actually, this is based, the source, it says, is from a Spanish melody. Now, I have a question, another aside, as far as worship is concerned. Did Temple Emmanuel ever have, I did purchase, and did not have time to read, I'm sure you've all seen these books, yes? All right, A Light in the Prairie by Jerry Crystal, right, about the history of Temple Emmanuel, and they came to stay. So new that even I'm in this book. But I did not get a chance to read both of these books. I'll be honest with you. I did not get a chance to read both of these books, which I bought at the Temple Emmanuel bookstore for a nice price. You can buy it there in the gift shop. I did not get a chance to read these over the weekend. So, my question is, did Temple Emmanuel ever have its main service, as some Reformed synagogues did in the early years, on Sunday? Yes?
They had a proposal for it, and it was voted down in the early 1900s.
Great.
It's in the Jerry Crystal book.
Okay. So you understand that Jews of Reformed progressive liberal persuasion wanted to be part of society, of American society. The Temple, and it's just like we have Temple in Emmanuel in Dallas, the Temple in Cleveland recently stopped having its main service, a weekday service, but it was still a main service. That's when the people came to pray on Sunday. Because they could say to their neighbors, you see, you're going to your house of worship, we're going to our house of worship. When you were a little girl, main service was on Sunday. Abba Hillel Silver was the red. So, this obviously was just in case a Protestant friend would come to see what it was all about, and they would see that there was a hymnal, they would see that the hymns were in English, and they would feel that, oh, the Jews are just like us. In Germany, Cantor Louis Lewandowski was writing music for the Progressive Synagogue. This meant music written for soprano, alto, tenor, and bass. He wrote this simple Lecha Dodi. How good Lecha Dodi. Become a standard in the United States Reforms temples. She wrote the following. How good it is to thank the Lord, to praise thy name, O thou most high, to tell thy kindness through the day, thy attempt to take what was considered traditional and Americanizing. And since we're talking about standards, here's another, what do you call them, warhorse of the classic American Reformed Synagogue, written by A.W. Binder, composer and Jewish musicologist and professor at the School of Sacred Music in New York. When I came to Dallas in 1997, this was on the repertoire for me to sing at Temple Shalom during the high holidays. All the world shall come to serve thee and bless thy glorious name, and thy righteousness triumphant the island shall acclaim. Yea, the people tell those seeking who knew thee not before, and the ends of earth shall praise thee and tell thy greatness o'er. Now I understand that Temple Emmanuel very recently used the old Union prayer book that I believe was copyrighted like in 1961, and the choir sang some of the pieces that were sung at Temple Emmanuel, I think as far back as the 60s, nothing before that. And I believe All the World was sung that evening.
I was at Temple Emmanuel in the late 40s and early 50s when we sang that song.
Saying all the world. I sang it as a student at Hebrew Union College. You have to realize I was raised conservadox. that we lived in the suburbs. We drove 2 blocks away from shul and then walked. But we were conservadox also in the fact that on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, I was not allowed to watch television, play the piano, or cut paper. All signs of working. But my mother was allowed in the choir. So that was and my mother and father could sit together. So that made them conservative. But the rest of the service was absolutely, there were no instruments, and the service was absolutely a regular, traditional service. Traditional Judaism came to Dallas 12 years after Temple Emmanuel in 1886 with the founding of the remnants of Israel, which is what Shereth Israel means. A.I. Kaufman was the first cantor who served until 1890. Tifereth Israel was founded in 1890. Now, the music of conservative and Orthodox synagogues is bound by tradition. Certain scales reminiscent of major and minor scales of Western music limit the scope and creativity for composers. These specific scales and choices are called nusach. Certain melodies had to be in major, and that would be Adonai Malach Keyut Lavesh, or Shema Yisrael. Certain melodies had to be in minor, which were known as the Magen Avos melody. Magen Avot da 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 da. A fourth scale we're all familiar with is known as Ahava Rabbah, and that's the Fiddler on the Roof type of scale that goes ya ba 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 yismechu v'malachutcha, those scales, and a fourth one indigenous only to the Jewish people, a study mode. When picture 2 yeshiva boys across a desk that looks like this. There's one boy here, there's one boy here, they're going over Talmud, and there was a chant that they would do as they were shuttling, and in English it would be almost like, if we light candles on Yom Kippur, then absolutely we'd light candles on Shabbos. And the other one would say, but, and that's how they would argue back and forth. From that, we get, all related to that study mode. And as an aside, if you didn't see my lecture at the Brit Library, you know that Gershwin took that melody. Baruch hu et Adonai Amvarach, Baruch Adonai Amvarach Le'olam Va'ed, Baruch Atah Adonai Noten HaTorah. It ain't necessarily so. It ain't necessarily. This is documented. Absolutely, that's where we got it. Now, originally I thought that I would bore you if every single song that I sang was based on Lechadodi. So you will hear some examples of Lechadodi. Here's a Lechadodi composed by a chazan whose name was Adolf Kachko. And by the way, since Saul Sanders, the former chazan of Shereth Israel, was a graduate of the same school that I graduated from, it's very possible that this was one of the Lechadodis that he sang at Shereth Israel. They both studied from the same book. And it sounds like this, and this is in the correct, quote-unquote, Musaf. We still singing all the world. Lechadodi likrat kalam, pnei Shabbat nekabla. Shamor v'zachor b'dibur echad, kishmiyanu el hamyuchad. Adonai echad u'shemo echad, l'shem ultiferet v'litchila. Lechadodi likrat kalam, pnei Shabbat nekabla.
Shabbat, Lechu v'nelcha, ki hi mekor ha'beracha, merosh mikedem nesucha, sof ma'aseh v'machashavat echila, le'adodi likrat kala, le'adodi likras kala, p'nei Shabbos nekablo. Ashkenazi. How many verses are there in Lechadodi? Does anybody know? 9. There are 9 verses. Reform liberal Judaism took out 5 of the verses, references to Jerusalem and Zion specifically, because it became clear to Reform Jews there was no reason to go back to Israel to form a state. We were very happy here in the diaspora. And so certain verses were cut. Also, repetition of prayers cut, unnecessary. Why are prayers repeated in a traditional service? Anybody know why? For the people who can't recite them, who aren't there with us. And then you go back and do it for yourself. So, now, as I was looking through some of my books, I came across, as I was looking for what I would be doing tonight, I came across this book called Friday Evening Melodies for Synagogue, School, and Home. I happened to open it up, and it says, property of Cantor, Saul Sanders. Madeline, my voice teacher, either she gave it to me, or she gave it to Lisa Levine, my predecessor. So to tell you the truth, I don't remember how I came to this, but this was owned by Saul. And here, I can tell you that the composer it was composed by Rabbi Israel Goldfarb. And here is the Lechadodi from this particular book. It goes up to an F. Pray for me. I think all of them have been in 3/4 time. They've all been in 3/4 time. I promise you later, I have some in 4/4 time. And one, by an obscure composer, it's in 7/4 time. But no, I'm kidding. Okay. So here's Shamor V'Zalpor. Let me have it. Where are we going to do a verse? Okay. We just did that. Now we're going to... No, I guess we're not. Okay, so that's that. Thank you. Okay. Oh, so you're learning something too. Back at Temple Emmanuel. No, I want to go back a little, and just to make mention of something. And that is about Saul Sanders, who left his collection of composed music, of synagogue music. He left it at Sharon, Israel. Madeline told me that after he retired, she noticed that Ken Cohen, who replaced him, and Bernie Lowe, who replaced Ken Cohen, didn't use any of Saul Sanders' music, and Madeline wanted it back. They can't find it. They don't know where it is. So its location is a mystery. I will ask the current cantor, Chazan Drepker, if he has seen anything of it. But it is, they cannot locate it.
Did you ask Yitzhak Cohen?
No, I didn't.
Why don't you do that?
Good idea. Moving along quickly in this history, Rabbi Levi Olin had big plans for his new Temple Emmanuel. He wanted to hire Sam Adler, the son of Cantor Olin's temple, Cantor Olin's temple back in Worcester, Mass, Hugo Adler. Sam was hired in February of 1953, the first official, I think, music director of Temple Emmanuel. And I would like to quote a little of what Jerry Crystal says about what Sam Adler did, because why should I reinvent the wheel? It's all here. Adler arrived in Dallas in February of 1953 and immediately captured attention by originating a children's choir to sing on Saturday mornings with the Sisterhood Choir directed by Sadie Lefkowitz. At that time, Edward Betcher, thank you, led a choir of 8 professional singers for Friday night services. Adler organized a volunteer adult choir. Among those invited to join was the newly confirmed Rosalie Cinnamon, who was the first confirmand to sing at a confirmation service.
Thank you for the plug.
You're welcome. In 1972, she became soloist with the Temple Choir, a position she still holds 27 years later? Or we don't go in there. We don't go there.
We're not counting.
Got it. When the choir grew to about 50 members, it began singing on a regular basis during Friday night services. Sam Adler felt that Temple Emmanuel, more than any other temple in the country, contributed to the growth of Jewish music by performing every new piece that came out. During the 1960s, we were the only large Jewish choir in this country, he said. Jewish publisher, if the choir did not perform a new piece, then Transcontinental, the only Jewish publisher in America, could not afford to publish that particular piece of music because the temple's disregard was tantamount to a works gathering dust on the shelf. Some of the highlights of Adler's tenure were the choir's performances of Handel's Judas Maccabeus and Samson, Mendelssohn's Elijah, and Mozart's Judith, as well as works by contemporary composers Ernest Bloch, Franz Waxman, and Darius Milhaud. Elizabeth Olin, Rabbi Olin's older daughter, found singing in the choir exciting because Sam Adler not only explained each piece of music, but discussed the history of a piece of music in relationship to the whole Jewish music tradition. Simon Sargon told me recently that Sam Adler used the music of his cantor father, Hugo, and correct me guys if I'm wrong, also the music of Isidor Fried,
Correct.
Max Helfman,
Correct.
Herbert Fromm,
Right.
among
For
others.
all of them.
Yes?
I
Among
sung for
others.
all of them, and there is a meal of Pado D in 4/4 time.
So, first, here is a Lechuna Ranana, a psalm written by Hugo Adler, very possibly sung by a soloist at Temple Emmanuel. Lechuna Ranana l'Adonai, nari al tzor yishenu. Izmiros nari alo, ki el gadol Adonai, umelech gadol al kol Elohim, Hashem yado, melech haaretz, v'soafos harim. sound familiar?
No.
But written by his father, Hugo. It is the only remnant that I could find in my collection. And you remember I mentioned this book, this publishing house called Transcontinental Music, and this is where I found it. When I was a cantor, a cantorial student, excuse me, in the School of Sacred Music, you would be farmed out to little tiny synagogues around the New York area, and we were little pishers then, pardon the expression, but we were just beginning to learn the Reform and, by the way, traditional repertoire. And so we were handed these booklets, and they would say, go and learn it. So this by Hugo Adler, a complete collection, solo service for Sabbath Eve. Temple Emmanuel always had a choir. Did it ever? Now I didn't read the book, but were there soloists within the choir?
Let me make a comment.
Please.
In 1879, the representative of B'nai B'rith was making a tour of the lodges. When he got to Dallas, he makes a few mistakes. We find Emmanuel Lodge congregation with Mr. David Gosling as president and Reverend A. Seward as its spiritual guide in very thriving condition. We attended services in the gorgeous and handsome temple and listened to sweet and excellent music produced by the choir, which is composed of the following ladies and gentlemen: Mrs. L. Goslin, Mrs. Oppenheimer and Goldsmith, and Mr. Friedberg. All of them take delight in the performance of their duties and are very punctual in their attendance.
Thank you. Now, obviously, there are not four of me, so anything that Sam wrote for a four-part choir, there was nothing really that I could reproduce. This is, however, from a second service that he wrote for solo voice. See if this sounds familiar. That other relatively known composers within the Jewish Reform community were featured at Temple Emmanuel. Isidore Fried, for instance, a professor at Hebrew Union College, of blessed memory by the time I got to the school, but still taught. I recently did a paper on the history of Reform music from right after World War II to the present. And Isidore Fried was one of the only composers in the 50s and 60s who started writing specific types of services. Before, we had people like Herbert Fromm, and we had people like Shalit and Frederick Pickett, who wrote modern music, and of course realized that Reform composers were free. They were not confined to the stringent laws of that Nusach I was talking about. But Fried decided he was going to write a Hasidic-style service. This, I believe, was written in the early 60s. The Lachadodi that I found, Mimi and I decided was not for public consumption. However, most of our Reform Jews who are here this evening, and perhaps many from Shereth Israel and Tiferet, etc., who have been to the temples in town, this will sound very familiar to you from Isidore Fried's Hasidic service. Rosalie, did you notice that I cut a couple of
We do
words?
it Sephardic.
Ah, but I'm not there yet.
Okay, there's also.
I understand that Sephardic Hebrew was not introduced to Temple Emmanuel until the arrival of Simon.
Not true.
That's what the book says.
Not true.
That's what the book says.
The book is wrong then.
All right.
Completely accurate in many places.
Okay. Page 32.
We've told Jerry about some of them.
Oh, okay. Hey, all I can do is read a book. I can't.
Okay, there's also a free Lakadoji in 4/4 time that's really quite nice.
Yes.
You don't know that.
No. And is it choral?
Is it what?
Choral.
It's choral and solo.
Right.
Yes.
Isidore Fried also took the music of Salomone Rossi, the Renaissance composer. Now, he took music that Rossi composed for the synagogue, but he interpolated it for the Reform synagogue and created a Salomone Rossi service. Here's the Lachadodi from that service, also in 4/4 time. Pretend this is a harpsichord.
That's not the one I know.
Sephardic Hebrew come into Temple Emmanuel?
In the 60s.
Okay, I'm going to do this in Sephardic Hebrew. Go. Hitorari, hitorari, hivorefuni ori, uri uri, shiraveri, kevod Adonai alayim nigla, lemadoni ligrat kalam, bene Shabbat nekabelam. Okay, I'm looking at the time. We are moving on to a very familiar Hashkivenu that I'm sure you did, because this Hashkivenu is sung still all over the country. In fact, when Mimi and I were rehearsing this, she remembers singing this at Sheriff. Hashkivenu by Helfman. I'm not going to sing the whole thing. Beautiful choral piece by Max Helpman. Should be very familiar to you. Yes?
Yes.
Thank God.
Don,
Yes?
may I share a really terrible story about Helpman?
Are you ready for a terrible story? How terrible is it?
It's terrible.
Oh, wonderful. We're
Okay.
ready.
Max Helpman came to Dallas and brought some of his music to be performed at his niece's wedding when I had come back to Dallas. And he asked me to sing his music, and he brought it to rehearsal on Friday afternoon. And we rehearsed, and we rehearsed, and we rehearsed some more. And he said, I will meet you, Rosalie, on Sunday afternoon before the wedding. And I said, fine. I didn't hear a word from Mr. Helpman. I became very nervous. So I came early on Sunday afternoon, and I asked one of the ushers outside, would he please tell Mr. Helpman that I'm here to rehearse the music? And he said, he died last night. And I said, what are you talking about? He told me he was going to be here to rehearse the music. How dare he do this? But he stood up, he made a toast to the bride and groom, and he died. And I had to stand in front of the congregation, including his widow, and sing that music, which was about the most difficult thing I ever did. So I will help mine. It really happened.
Sam Adler, to continue the history of musicians at Emmanuel, resigned in 1966 to accept the post of professor of composition at the Easton School of Music of the University of Rochester. The choir was delighted with the choice of Simon Sargon, a charming and gifted composer, conductor, and pianist, who brought a rich and varied background to the temple. Born in Bombay, India, to an Indian father and an American mother, who had met each other in Jerusalem. His family left for safer shores when he was a baby, sailing for America on the last boat allowed to travel through the Suez Canal before the outbreak of World War II. Simon heightened the emotional component of the service by introducing more songs by Jewish composers, injecting traditional folk songs, and adapting music from the conservative and Orthodox traditions. It says here, he changed the Ashkenazic to Sephardic Hebrew, but you're telling me the book is wrong, and it happened before Simon arrived. Yes? Say it again? No, tell me who Glick was. Between Adler and Simon? Okay.
It probably was during Ed Blick.
Okay. Say that again.
Probably during the time of Ed Blick. I was gone. I was in New York some of those years.
Uh-huh. Okay. And
But
that's...
that was after Ed Blick.
That's right, after it.
Because I came back when Alvin was here.
And so, we have Simon Sargon and Temple Emmanuel. well known still within Jewish music, Jewish musicians. Simon still plays a part at Temple Emmanuel by helping, correct me if I'm wrong, with your the champagne, right, and the series. And now, as I'm sure most of you know, Temple Emmanuel is looking for their first cantor. Music, the history of music of the United States does not include the music of Temple Emmanuel. The history of your music director, the history of your choir is well known around the United States. Well, at its height, what was the size of the choir?
The High Holy Days about 100. 90 to 100.
Currently, I heard there were more in the past. Was it ever over 100?
No.
Okay.
Carol agrees with me, and she's always right.
So approximately 100 singers. And so the introduction of something new at Temple Emmanuel, as many of you know, has not come easy. The apprehension of what will happen when a quote-unquote soloist who is considered clergy, you know I can marry and bury people. As a cantor, I can also do baby names. What will happen when this cantor arrives? I will tell you, it looks to be a plum position. I have heard from one cantor who said, I know you're not a member of Temple Emmanuel, but could you talk to that committee? They said I wasn't ready for them. Could you see if they would let me come and sing anyway? And I said, I'm on a hello, how are you basis with them. I understand that the process is going to be very difficult. But you should know, Temple Emmanuel of Dallas is one of the last major classic Reformed synagogues, but one of the last to hire a cantor. Temple Emmanuel in Denver has had a cantor there, I believe, for close to 10 years. The Temple in Atlanta has a cantor now. The Plum Street Synagogue in Cincinnati now has a cantor. Temple Emmanuel, Congregation Emmanuel of it's a long name, of New York City, has a cantor. We won't go there. Yes.
I think it's in Chicago had a cantor in the beginning of the 50s, the end of the Reformed movement.
Yes. Well, I used to say the reason that I don't do weddings, a lot of weddings, even as a co-officiant in Dallas, is because Southern Reformed Jews don't know from a cantor. They know the rabbi. You want a cantor? But Rabbi Lyon, our soon-to-be senior rabbi at Temple Shalom, said that Beth Israel in Houston always had a cantor. Always.
Israel in Houston?
Yep, that's what
Not
he said.
always. Not always.
Okay. For a long time. Maybe since the 50s. Right, long time. Okay, yes?
I want to add a footnote about Sheriff Israel's affairs, if I may.
Yes, I'm not done with them, by the way.
Oh, good.
I want to finish with Temple Emmanuel.
Fine.
Yes,
May I just say something
Please.
about the cantor at Temple Emmanuel?
please.
I don't think that a good many people in our congregation are so concerned about the cantor per se. I think the people in the choir are concerned with what is going to happen to the choir. And the people in the choir are concerned with the quality of the music that we are now having, and that perhaps the cantor will either continue with or stay on a high standard like we're
Let me tell you, as a former board member of the American Conference of Cantors, a reform organization of cantors, there are many viable candidates for your temple. There are composers. There are conductors who have degrees from Juilliard. They are out there. They are graduating, if not this year or next year, the following year. As I have, and I don't think I am speaking out of turn, as I have said to many members of Temple Emmanuel, if the person who is hired has any sense at all, he or she will not change anything. Nothing. When I take over a position as Cantor, and this, by the way, is the last position I'm taking over. I don't touch. I say to them, I want to learn your mincha. I want to learn your custom. I want to be a part of your community. Anybody, a rabbi or a cantor, who walks in and changes things is going to offend an awful lot of people. People are, this is the way we've done it. I like it this way. It's usually about 6 or 7 months when I hear, he's been here for 6 or 7 months, he hasn't done a thing. That's when I say, aha, they're ready. So, I pray for you that the candidate who is chosen will have the sechel to become a part of your community before beginning to make any changes. Yes.
I'm curious to know in the book of Temple Shalom, how many non-Jews are in the choir?
Read the book. I don't know. Right. Ask me. Did you hear the question?
What's the question?
How many non-Jews are in the choir?
How many what?
Non-Jews.
9 or 10. And a couple of converts.
Temple Shalom at the high holidays. Our soloists number 4, non-Jews. Shereth Israel, there are no
They're not allowed to.
non-Jews, correct. And Tifereth, I believe, is only a male choir still, right? Okay. Yeah, they do for the high holidays. I've been there and heard a choir.
That's true.
You missed it. No, wait a second. I've been here for 6 years, and the first year I was here, I took my mother to shul. They had a choir.
That's right.
Ah, okay. I have to move on. Here is a piece that Simon was published in the year 2000, or would say, copyrighted in 2000. It's for 4 parts. It's 9 o'clock. I'd like to move on because there are other musicians who came and went in this town. We're not doing it. Cantor Yitzchak Zrebker, known to those who cannot pronounce his name as Cantor Z, came to Shereth in 1996. He was born in Ukraine, received his master's degree in music from the Odessa City Academy of Music, and he studied liturgical singing and composition at the Cantor University in Israel. Now, I thought this was an original melody by Cantor Zrebker. Mimi tells me that it may be, but he absolutely arranged this. It is a Sim Shalom that I sang, and he sang, and his choir sang at his installation. Sim Shalom Tova Uvracha, Fein Vachesed V'Rachamim, Aleinu Ve'Yakol Yisrael, Amen. Sim Shalom Tova Uvracha, Okay.
We sing it too.
Oh, wonderful. I'm not familiar with it. But it was his arrangement. Yeah, they sing this? Never heard until he introduced it to me. Let me see. Lisa Lipko-Levine became the first cantor of Temple Shalom, serving from 1990 to 1996. Here is a composition of Misha Berach, a prayer that says, "The one who blesses our ancestors." And you know, Misha Berach was introduced back into the Reform movement by Debbie Friedman, and now it is taken off. I don't know what is occurring in the, well, I know it exists. There are healing services that now exist in synagogues and temples around the country. And here is a full book of music, all with music for healing services. The Misha Berach prayer, for those who don't know, can be not only for someone who is ill, that's the blessing that was introduced by Debbie Friedman, but it's also can be used for a wedding couple. You realize that is not a Yiddish term, it's a German term. Ausruf with the umlaut over the husband. That it can also bless a bar mitzvah, obviously a change of text. And so Lisa Levine wrote this Misha Berach, which is becoming famous around the country. Misha Berach Avoteinu, Avraham, Yitzchak, veYaakov. Misha Berach Imoteinu, Sarah, Rivka, Leah, v'Rachel. May the one who blessed our mothers, may the one who blessed our fathers, hear our prayer, hear our prayer, hear our prayer, hear our prayer, and bless us as well. Bless us with the power of your healing. Bless us with the power of your hope. May our hearts be filled with understanding and strengthened by the power of your love. Misha Berach Avoteinu, etc. Lisa, by the way, moved to Des Moines, and she is now serving a large synagogue in Kansas City, Missouri. Yitz Cohen became the cantor of Tiferet in 1970, and currently his son Yaakov serves as cantor. And I understand he has an absolutely gorgeous voice. I arrived in Dallas in 1977, bringing with me the latest in Reform synagogue music to Temple Shalom. What did I say, 1977? I arrived in Dallas in 1997. I haven't had dinner yet. Bringing to the temple music, of course, that was introduced already by Simon to Temple Emmanuel. But now it was Lisa's turn and my turn to bring more modern compositions into our Reform circle. Music by the Israeli composer living in Laguna Beach, California, Ami Aloni, who wrote a jazz service. Michael Isaacson, who wrote a service for the millennium. Craig Taubman, who, by the way, created his Friday Night Live sensation in a conservative shul in Los Angeles, California, Sinai Temple, the largest conservative temple, synagogue in Los Angeles. Music from Israel, composers of folk and camp songs, by the way, have made their way into the repertoire of Temple Shalom, and here are a few snippets that may sound familiar to you. Here is a Lachadodi out of Israel, coming out of, I believe, the Israel Song Festival or the Hasidic Song Festival. You ever heard of those festivals?
Yes.
Do you know what allows something to be in the Hasidic Song Festival? It has to either be something, a prayer, liturgical, or a quote from Tanakh, from the Bible. So, and then anything goes. So here is Lachadodi by Mordechai Ze'ir. Lechadodi, likrat kala, b'nei Shabbat, nikabla, lechadodi, likrat kala, b'nei Shabbat, nikabla, Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat Shalom u'levorach. Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat Shalom u'levorach. Remember I sang at the beginning how good it is to thank the Lord. Recently, the ACC, the American Conference of Cantors with Transcontinental Music, the Union of American Hebrew Congregations, and the CCAR, the Reform Movement, printed a new book of songs, and it's still in there, but listen what they changed. How good it is to thank the Lord, to praise your name, O God Most High, to tell your kindness through the day, your faithfulness when night draws nigh. The thous and the these and the those, and I must tell you that in about 4 years, a new Reform prayer book is making the scene. Excuse me, influenced by the rabbis and Jewish leaders from the East and West Coast, who are, what we might say, trying to be politically correct. Lord, the male-sounding term, will no longer exist. Kingdom will be probably realm or something else. King will not exist either. And so we are all running around frantically trying to figure out how we are going to change the terms. I know Temple Emmanuel has made a much concerted effort. I believe the rabbis have a choice. If they wish to change the term He and God, and Lord rather, to something a little more acceptable. I remember as a cantor 25 years ago, back east, at an interfaith service where the Protestant minister was upset because in the third verse we referred to God as He. So this has been going on for quite a long time, and as far as the Reform synagogues in the area, it is making its way into our worship as well. Let me close with something from Craig Calvin's Friday Night Live, which we've been doing at Temple Shalom for about, we're into our 3rd year. I have a klezmer band that comes in. We do it once a season. The music is meant for people to get up, to clap, to dance, to find real joy in Shabbat. It is not for everyone. There are a few members of our temple who stay away. We did a jazz service by Ami Aloni with the composer at the piano, with drums and a bass. And when we were doing the Torah service, and we were going, Hodo al eretz v'shamayim v'yarem keren le'amo. They got up and left. They could not. Of course, what they didn't realize, which we tried to make clear, was that What was Jewish worship like 2,500 years ago? There were musicians, there was clapping, there was dancing, the Levites were the choir. You had your hand up.
Yes, did you say once a season?
Once a season.
Okay, that's all I want to know.
Yeah. Actually, well, Rabbi Lyon and I haven't looked at the liturgical calendar yet. I will tell you, Rabbi Lyon is being installed Simchat Torah weekend. Friday night will be a little more formal. Saturday, we are calling it right now Shabbat Unplugged. And the choirs will sing, and we will do the same sort of service, but it will be for Simchat Torah. Here is his L'Chadodi, Dixieland. Right, this is one. Sheretz Israel is doing a Kabbalat Shabbat service. That is, before the sun goes down, there will be, what is it called? Shir Adonai Shir Chadash, sing a new Lord, something like that, right? Shir Chadash, a new song. So that there will be musicians there to get the congregation started. Their custom, of course, is not to have any musicians, and when the sun goes down and the stars come out, the instruments will be put away, but it is making its way to Sheretz, this style of music, and Rabbi Kaiserman came to a Friday Night Live once at Temple Shalom and said, when are we going to do this at Temple Emmanuel? And it will happen sooner or later. Thank you all for helping me learn a little more about this. Yes, Rosalie.
Okay, on May 31st, which is Choir Appreciation Night, which we celebrate every year, there will be a premiere of a new song that Simon Sargon has written for the choir, Psalm 29. We will have timpani and trumpets as well as choir and organ.
Wait, one more.
I want to know when you're going to do another flamenco Shabbat at Temple Shalom. For all of you who missed the first one, it was magnificent.
Now, I called it a flamenco Shabbat because it was called Ta'amei Sifarad. If you take the term Sifarad and you think of Ein Nadir Kadonai, it wasn't that kind of Sephardic music. It was Spanish music that sounded Castilian. It sounded, and when I spoke to the composer, who was Ami Aloni, I said, Ami, do you have any charts for guitar? He said, no, not really. Do with it as you want, as many, whatever musical instruments. And it called out for a flamenco guitarist, and I had castanets as well. And whoever came to enjoy it, as I guess you did, enjoyed it very much. I guess look at the local Jewish newspapers to see if I can muster up the funds to pay for the musicians. So, thank you all very much. Please forgive me for getting my history a little wrong.